Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at John chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, where Jesus turns water into wine. Back in chapter 1, the previous chapter, we'd entitled that whole section Meeting Jesus, where first John the Baptist is on the scene and he introduces Jesus. He's talking about Jesus a couple of different days. And then Andrew and another disciple, I like to think maybe that was John himself, but we don't know, so that's just speculation. But Andrew and another disciple, they follow Jesus, and they spend the day with Jesus. And Andrew brings his brother Simon Peter, and then the following day, Philip comes to Jesus, and Philip goes and gets Nathanael, and he meets Jesus as well. So all these people, of course, John already knew him, John the Baptist, but all these other people are meeting Jesus in chapter 1. Now, as we come to chapter 2, we're going to see two special events. One will be a wedding. That's what we'll be looking at this time. A wedding where Jesus turns water into wine. And as a result of that miracle, his disciples that are already following him, they believe. And you say, I thought some of them believed already. Well, I think their faith is strengthened. We'll see that. And then in the rest of the chapter, we're going to see a visit to Jerusalem and the Passover and Jesus cleansing the temple. But we're not going to get there right now. Verse 1, on the third day, and it's been remarked when you see that phrase, on the third day, look and see if maybe there's a picture of the death, burial, and resurrection. Maybe a hint there, because we've seen Jesus with some disciples, and now we're going to see a wedding. And there's a sense in which, when we come to the resurrection, there's a celebration there, because that which was dead, that's what died for us, has risen and brought about a new life. So on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Now, Cana, actually, scholars are, um, there's a little bit of controversy and discussion, not real controversy perhaps, but there's notice where I put the city of Cana. It's a city in Galilee, that's evident from the passage, but its exact location is disputed. If you go to Galilee today, they'll usually point to one particular town. Well, that's Cana. I'm not sure they're right. That doesn't seem to be the place that was actually there in Jesus' day, but close by instead. So on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and we're going to see Cana repeated again in chapter 4. There's going to be a nobleman. I wonder if he was the wedding, but a nobleman who is going to come from Cana um, down to the Sea of Galilee where Jesus is to seek a healing for his son. But that's coming up in chapter 4. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. Now, when you speak of a wedding, um, we're going to get into this right now. Um, we always think in the West, you have a ceremony where the people gather and they stand before a preacher or a priest or someone and they go through the vows and everybody observes, and then after that they have the reception. Weddings in the ancient world, and in particular Jewish weddings, weren't quite like that. Instead, they would have exchanged vows a long time earlier, but now they're coming together, and there's going to be a celebration, and it's mostly about the honeymoon because everybody's there on the honeymoon. Now, that doesn't mean they're doing anything appropriate in public, but they come together and they're celebrating, and this celebration might take a few days. In fact, it wasn't uncommon for it to take an entire week. Of course, that depends on the status of, how much money the bride and groom and their parents have. Are they able to afford the sort of lavishness of a entire week? So it might be shorter than that. It might be only maybe 2 or 3 days or something like that. But it's still, this is a party, and both Jesus and his disciples, and notice the mother of Jesus. Now we know her name, but we know her name from the other Gospels, the Virgin Mary, but she's not named here in the Gospel of John. And so she's there, and Jesus and his disciples, they had also been invited. Now, were they connected? I don't know, But the mother of Jesus is going to be taking, it looks like she's taking an active part in the wedding. So was this family? Um, some have gone so far as to suggest this was the wedding of Jesus. That that just isn't the case. That would have been mentioned if that was the case. But verse 3, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. No, as I said, ancient weddings, it was all about the celebration, which means it was all, the way we think it's all about the reception, which wasn't just a little short, a few hours of partying. This could go on for, and typically went on for days, maybe an entire week. Um, and so, remember, it's all about the honeymoon, and everybody's on the honeymoon. And so eventually, in this case, the wine runs out. So think about the various weddings you've been to, and maybe receptions, um, and where the wedding cake, they go to have some wedding cake, and there isn't any. The first few people have some, and then it's all over with. Um, or maybe it was a sit down reception, and half the people get fed and the other half don't, and that's a little embarrassing. Well, it might be a little embarrassing if it happens these days, but in that culture, in an honor and shame culture, this was a matter of honor and shame. And so escalate the feelings, escalate the embarrassment tenfold or maybe a hundredfold, and you might capture the idea of what's going on here. This this was a big deal. And the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Now, I'm not sure what she is expecting. He can't very well go down to the grocery store and purchase wine. But perhaps she has an inkling of what he is able to do, even though he's, to the best of our knowledge, and actually the scriptures are going to call this the first miracle. He's never performed any miracles prior to this time. But I think maybe she has an idea that there's an ability that he has, even though he has never manifested it. Verse 4, and Jesus said to her, woman, now that sounds a little cold. I have never called my mother a woman. I've, called her mother or mom. She's with the Lord now. Um, but what he's doing, he's speaking to her formally, and so what sounds cold and harsh, I don't think is, but it is a bit formal. And indeed, he will use that same term to her when he is on the cross in a very tender moment, as she will say to her, as she's standing next to a disciple, one of the disciple whom he loved. He's going to say, "Woman, behold your son." And then we'll speak to him, son, behold your mother. And that's a very tender term. That's not harsh. And so I don't think this is too, but it is formal. Woman, what does that have to do with us? What is that between us? My hour has not yet come. And when he says that, that's going to be a specific phrase that we're going to see here in the Gospel of John. For example, in John chapter 7, verse 30, there are going to be those that want to arrest him, but his hour had not yet come, so they're not able to do that. And again, John chapter 8, verse 20, the same idea that his enemies will be out to get him, but his hour had not yet come. But we finally get to chapter 13, verse 1, where they are finally at the end of Jesus' ministry. In chapter 13, they're in the last week of the ministry of Jesus, and he's about to go to the cross. And so, knowing that his hour had come, and he goes on to prepare his disciples for what's going to take place on the cross. And then finally, when he is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he is praying to the Father for the disciples, and he says, Father, the hour has come. So this was looking at, ultimately, it was looking at the cross. But you say, well, is he speaking of the cross? My hour's not yet come. What does that have to do with the wedding and the wine? You see, what's going to happen is Jesus is going to do something, and it's going to be rather obvious that Jesus is special. Can I say it this way? He's going to be glorified. And we'll see that before we get out of this section. He's going to be glorified, and ultimately he's going to be glorifying the cross. but his hour, at least for the cross, for that glorification, has not yet come. Verse 5, his mother said to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. Now, that's not definitive, but I think perhaps it suggests that she has an active part in this wedding. She's giving instructions to the servants. I'm not sure that she would be doing that. Maybe this is only a suggestion, but it sounds like she has an active part in the wedding. Verse 6, now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom. Actually, our translators inserted the word custom for the Jewish purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. These are large, they need to be stone, white stone, because stone doesn't transmit impurity, at least ceremonial impurity in Jewish thinking. So they were there because this was an observant Jewish family, and if somebody needs to involve some sort of purification, this is able. This is not meant as drinking water. I'm not saying it's bad or that it's unhealthy, but it wasn't for that purpose. Um, and yet this water was there, and so it was there for them to um, purify. If there was some sort of ritual uncleanliness, the water would be used for that purpose. Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water. So they filled them up to the brim. That's going to be a lot, a lot of water. And it's going to, you know where it's going. It's going to be a lot of wine. And he said to them, draw out some of now and take it to the head waiter. So they took it to him. And I can imagine them bringing it to the head waiter. Verse 9, when the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, but did not know where it came from. But the servants, though, notice the head waiter doesn't know, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, and they take it to him, not to wash his hands, but to drink. And they're waiting for his response because you didn't normally give somebody. I mean, it's not that you couldn't drink water in that era, but this wasn't the time or the place for that. And so they give it to him, and they're waiting for him to, like, what's he going to say to us? You sort of put us on the front line. So they know it's water, but he doesn't know it's water. And the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine, but you have kept the good wine until now. Now, is this said as I don't think it's necessarily a rebuke, but that's not the way we usually do it. Usually we serve the good stuff first. And but this tasted so much better that it was striking. And so I'm not sure if he's saying you should have served this first, or what a great, this is so great. Yes, the other was okay, the other was good, but this is so much better. And so unknowingly, he's pointing at the miracle and saying, not only was this great, not only was there a lot of it. Now he doesn't know that. The servants know there's a lot of wine that's just been made, and it's really, 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 really good. And so you've kept the good wine until now. Verse 11, this beginning of his signs, and remember how John's gospel started. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So it started us with the beginning. And now this beginning of his signs, and a sign, remember, a sign is something that points to something. We sometimes translate that miracles, and that's okay because it was. But it's a sign, and the purpose of a sign is to point to something. And it's pointing to Jesus and to what he can do and to who he is. So this beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory. Now, there's already been a reference back in the prologue about the manifestation of his glory. Remember how the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory. Glory is to be only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so here was the manifestation of that glory. And as a result of that manifestation, notice his disciples believed in him. The servants had seen, I think they may believe something too, And evidently the disciples found out about it. Did they find out from the servants? Did they find out from Mary? Did they find out from just tasting the wine? I'm not sure how they found out, but they believed. And you say, well, didn't they believe earlier? Didn't Andrew believe when he went and got his brother Peter, Simon Peter, and say, "Hey, we found the Messiah"? Didn't Philip believe when when he met Jesus and he went and got Nathanael and said, "We found the one that Moses and the prophets talked about"? Didn't Nathanael believe when he heard Jesus speak about, "I saw you under the fig tree"? Well, yes, but notice, and they believed in him. In other words, they are growing in their faith. They're believing new things and their belief is being strengthened. And that will continue throughout this entire book. By the way, it's meant to have that reaction in you as well. You see, Jesus had quenched their thirst. He had turned water into wine, and it was delicious wine, and he gave them to drink. But when we get to the end of the Gospel of John, we're going to see how he would be thirsty for them. And so their faith and their understanding and the measure and place of their belief is going to grow as they go through the story. And I hope it will do the same for you. Now, just to finish up, verse 12, after this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. Matthew, Mark, and Luke focus on a lot of the things that happen in and around Capernaum, up here in Galilee. But what we're going to see for us here in the Gospel of John, this is transitional because after this, they're going to move down to their first visit to Jerusalem, the first of many visits that John is going to tell us, going back and forth from Galilee to Jerusalem and back again. But we'll see that next time.